Harry's wife. Is Charles being weak about the titles? There has been plenty of reporting about the fact that Harry's wife and Harry have chosen that it should be Princess Lilibet and Prince Archie moving forward. This has caused a considerable amount of consternation from commentators, especially those below the line, dismayed that it would appear that Harry's wife is getting her way, notwithstanding her behaviours. Furthermore, there are those that believe that Charles is being weak by allowing the use of these titles. But is that the case? Well, as always, it's important to have a proper understanding of what the situation is, what the options are, and then to consider what might actually happen. Originally, you'll recall that Harry's wife, not being that bright and not being particularly familiar with these matters, declared that the failure of Archie to be declared a prince was basically a racist act, and it was being done because of the colour of his skin. That, of course, was utter bullshit, and was commensurate with the victimhood that we know Harry's wife engages in, and was a pity play and smearing. The simple reason was that he was a great-grandchild of the monarch, and therefore he wasn't the firstborn son of a future king, and therefore was not automatically entitled to the title prince. Quite simply, she fucked it up, but naturally, as a consequence of her rampant victimhood, made it seem like this was a conscious act to exclude Archie when it wasn't. When Queen Elizabeth passed away and Charles became king, that automatically meant that Lilibet and Archie were entitled to use the titles Prince and Princess because they are children of the son of the monarch. Therefore, they automatically became a prince and princess. Those titles, however, were not automatically used by Harry's wife. Instead, it became a matter of speculation as to whether they would be utilised. Also, as to whether Charles might take steps to prevent them being used. Accordingly, they have those titles automatically. Charles can prevent their use by the issuing of letters patent, but it has to be remembered, of course, that if he was to do that, it would seem that he's being mean to his grandchildren, and therefore it would be seen as a rather churlish act. Of course, there would be many that would suggest he ought to do this because, 1, why should they be entitled to titles, given that their parents don't want anything to do with the royal family? 2, why should they get titles after the way that their parents have behaved towards the royal family? And 3, they don't do anything for the royal family. Indeed, Lilibet was born in the United States, which is a country which doesn't have royalty, and therefore, accordingly, why would you bother to want to have them titles? All of those observations are pertinent. However, the fact is that Charles will need to manage his facade, and he's doing it as a means of asserting control over his son and his daughter-in-law as non-intimate secondary sources by wanting to appear to be fair. By allowing the use of the title and not blocking them, he is demonstrating that, see, I am being fair and appropriate. Of course, there'll be others that will regard that as weak conduct. But imagine if he were to take the steps to strip them or prevent their use of those titles. You know immediately what the response of Harry's wife would be: victimization and pity play. And it's highly likely that Charles, as a consequence of advice received also, is sick and tired of giving her free passes to have a go at the royal family by claiming that the royal family is awful. Whilst there are many people that would say, fuck her, who cares about what she has to say, she's a busted flush in that regard. Get on with it, don't allow them to use the titles, they don't deserve them, they're not appropriate, what have they got to do with Sussex? They're a prince and princess of Sussex, they've never even been to the county. There'll be many people who will say, show some strength and remove them. But it is the case that Charles has decided that not only does he not want to be seen as churlish, of course, part of wanting to manage the way that he is seen as part of his own facade management, but he's also being conscious of ensuring that he doesn't give Harry's wife any ammunition to run around claiming that it's a racist act, that she's being mistreated. There'll be those that will agree with such a stance, that would decide, look, turn the other cheek, don't give her an opportunity to complain, and then there'll be many others that will say, don't care about that, she'll find something else to complain about anyway, you may as well punish them by demonstrating some strength. I'd be interested to learn what your views are in that regard in the comments. Of course, what he's also managed to do is paint himself as not being horrible towards his grandchildren, demonstrating, although we don't get to see them, I'm not going to be like you, Harry's wife, and punish people. Instead, I'm going to allow them to have the titles. But also, he enabled Harry and Harry's wife to make the decisions about whether they would use them. Of course, only recently Buckingham Palace has updated the royal website to demonstrate them as Princess Lilibet and Prince Archie, whereas before it was Miss Lilibet Mountbatten Windsor and Master Archie Mountbatten Windsor. But by allowing Harry's wife and Harry to be the ones that make the decision about their use, he's also exposed them for their rampant hypocrisy. Repeatedly, Harry's wife has wanted to remove herself and yank Harry away from the British royal family. She said in the Oprah interview that she had no time, in effect, for the titles. But once again, this has exposed her hypocrisy, the fact that she is desperate for the use of those titles, desperate for the use of her own title, and allows Charles to show once again to the world what a hypocrite she is. Furthermore, it also means that in the United States, where their support is eroding faster than a chocolate fireguard melting, that more people will look at this and say, not only are you hypocritical, but you're living in our country and you're still insisting on the use of titles after 250 years ago we fought against this kind of thing. Are you taking the piss? So also Charles is not only allowing their hypocrisy to be exposed, but he's allowing them to take this stupid step which will not endear them to those Americans which still might view them favourably. Many Americans take very seriously the issue of the fact that they are a republic, that there's no royal family, the concept of freedom being one that's very important to Americans. And therefore, by having them exposed as wanting to continue to use titles both for themselves but also for their children, then in such circumstances, that is likely to result in an exacerbation of the dislike of them and an erosion of support for them further. So it might be the case, actually, that there is method to this madness on the part of King Charles, as he asserts control over them by ensuring that his facade is managed, but at the same time causing them to be exposed further, demonstrating their hypocrisy, and also eroding their support base even further. Many people, of course, are very angry about this as they see it as Madam getting her way. But it may well be the case that the royal family is playing the medium-term game here and allowing them to expose themselves once again, following the principles of giving the narcissist enough rope. What are your thoughts on this matter? Do you think Charles is weak and that he ought to have excluded the titles and that he ought to remove them now and prevent their use, in the same way that Princess Anne decided that her children wouldn't have titles? Or do you think that he's right to take the action that he's done to expose the hypocrisy and erode their support base? And do you see that he has an alternative strategy at hand? Let me know your thoughts in the comments section. I'm HG Tudor. Thank you for listening.